January 14th, the year 1979, Tommy DeSimone puts on his best suit, combs his hair, kisses his mother goodbye, gets into a car with two men he has known for years, men from his own crew, men he has no reason to doubt. The house they take him to is empty, no ceremony, no witnesses, no way out. His last words were two, "Oh no." He was 32 years old. His body has never been found. Goodfellas gives you a phone booth. Jimmy Conway with his back to the camera, receiver pressed against the glass, shoulders breaking, they got Tommy, then the film moves on. It gives you grief without an author, an execution without a name attached to it. John Gotti, the man Henry Hill would later identify by name, in writing, under oath, as the architect of what happened in that room, never appears on screen. Not once, not even as a shadow in the background. What Goodfellas never tells you is that this was not a mob procedure carried out by an indifferent institution enforcing its own rules. It was 9 years of accumulated personal rage, held in precise check by a man who understood that patience was the most dangerous weapon available to him. And the man at the center of it, the man whose name belongs in that phone booth scene, is the one Scorsese chose to leave out entirely. Let's start from the beginning. The family he was born into. Thomas Anthony DeSimone was born on June 6th of the year 1946 in Brooklyn, New York. He did not choose organized crime. He was delivered into it before he was old enough to understand what it was. His grandfather, Rosario DeSimone, had run the Los Angeles crime family in the 1920s. His uncle, Frank DeSimone, became the fifth boss of that same family in the year 1956, one of the most consequential mafia figures on the entire West Coast. His brothers, Robert and Anthony, were associates of the Gambino family, the most powerful organized crime organization in New York. His sister, Phyllis, became Jimmy Burke's mistress at 16 years old, which is how Tommy first made contact with the Lucchese world. Tommy DeSimone did not wander into this life looking for excitement. He was born inside its architecture. He was surrounded by it before he had the language to name it, and shaped by it before any alternative version of how a man was supposed to live had the chance to reach him. The mob was not a decision Tommy made. It was the only map he was ever handed. What Goodfellas does with this background is deliberate and revealing. Joe Pesci plays Tommy as a volatile, compact outsider, a small man manufacturing rage to compensate for irrelevance, someone whose violence feels almost philosophical, like he is fighting a war against his own insignificance. The shoeshine scene lands as hard as it does, precisely because Pesci's Tommy looks like a man who has spent every day of his life being looked past. The performance is extraordinary. It is also a fundamental misrepresentation of the man it is based on. The real Tommy DeSimone stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 225 pounds. He was not a man compensating for smallness. He was a physical presence who moved through rooms with the particular confidence of someone who had never once been told he did not belong. The inferiority the film projects onto him was real, but Goodfellas inverts its actual source entirely. It was not his size that gave Tommy something to prove. It was his brother. Anthony DeSimone had been killed by the Gambino family after turning informant. In the world Tommy inhabited, a rat in the bloodline was a contamination that never fully washed out. Henry Hill would say years later that Tommy was always carrying that, always living it down. The violence was not compensation for a physical shortcoming. It was an inheritance he was desperately trying to outrun, a debt he paid in other men's lives because he could not pay it any other way. In the year 1965, at 15 years old, Tommy was brought into Paul Vario's crew by Jimmy Burke, who had known the DeSimone family for years. Vario Paul Cicero in the film ran his operation out of a Brooklyn cab stand and was among the most productive earners in the entire Lucchese family, with his hands in truck hijackings, loan sharking, and labor rackets spread across Queens and Brooklyn. Burke was his most trusted lieutenant and closest operational partner. Henry Hill describes his first encounter with DeSimone as meeting a skinny kid in an oversized wise guy suit with a pencil mustache, performing an identity he was still in the process of constructing. Within months, the two of them were moving stolen cigarettes together, pulling $300 or $400 a day from construction sites and garment factories across the city. Tommy was 15 years old, and he was already learning the only economy he would ever fully understand. Did you know his first murder came at 17? Walking down a street with Henry Hill in the year 1968, Tommy spotted a complete stranger, a man named Howard Goldstein, someone he had never spoken to, someone who owed him nothing and had done nothing to him, turned to Hill and said, "Henry, watch this." Then he shot the man dead on the pavement. No argument, no debt, no provocation of any kind. Hill was shaken to the point of paralysis. "That was cold-blooded, Tommy," he said. Tommy's answer was 5 words. "Well, I'm a mean cat." Hill would describe him in later years as a pure psychopath, always strung out on cocaine, a homicidal maniac who required no particular reason to kill and invented one when the mood suited him. Tommy's sister, speaking years after his death, described his teenage years as revolving around boxing, weightlifting, and a punching bag he kept in the basement. He had an appetite for violence that operated independently of logic, but what Goodfellas consistently misses is that this violence was never entirely without structure. Tommy killed because killing was the most legible proof of loyalty available to him. His brother had broken the code. He would not. Every body was a declaration, a statement about which DeSimone he had chosen to be and which one he was determined never to become. To understand why John Gotti would personally authorize Tommy DeSimone's death and ultimately ensure he was present for it, you need to understand 2 men, William "Billy Bats" Benvena and Ronald "Foxy" Girothi. Because Tommy did not simply kill a made man. He killed 2 people who belonged, in the most specific and personal sense of that word, to John Gotti. And in doing so, he did not merely violate an institutional rule. He handed 2 personal insults to a man who cataloged grievances with the precision of an accountant and the patience of someone who understood that the right moment always arrived eventually. William Benvena, known universally as Billy Bats, had been a soldier in the Gambino family since the year 1961, when he received his button in Carmine Fatico's crew in Ozone Park, Queens. The same crew that had mentored a young John Gotti through his formative years in the life and shaped everything about how he understood power and loyalty and obligation. By the year 1970, when Benvena walked out of federal prison after 6 years on a narcotics charge, he and Gotti were old associates, in the deepest sense men formed by the same environment, bound by years of shared history and mutual obligation. This is not interpretation or inference. Nicholas Pileggi's Wise Guy, the book Scorsese adapted, directly records Hill's description of Bats at the welcome home party at Robert's Lounge with complete clarity. Billy was a made guy. He was with Johnny Gotti from near Fulton Street, and he was hooked up with the Gambinos. The connection between Bats and Gotti exists verbatim in the source material the film was constructed from. It does not appear anywhere in Goodfellas. Not as a line of dialogue, not as a detail in the voiceover, not even as an implication. Scorsese uses the murder to demonstrate Tommy's volatility and the crew's collective recklessness. He removes the name of the man who would spend the following 9 years engineering satisfaction for it. The night itself is thoroughly documented. It was May of the year 1970. Benvena, recently released and in a celebratory mood, made a joke at the welcome home party about Tommy's teenage years as a shoeshine boy. Whether he intended the comment to land with the weight it carried is entirely irrelevant. With Tommy DeSimone, there existed no category of casual ribbing and no margin for misinterpretation. He leaned across to Burke and Hill. "I'm going to kill that son of a bitch." 2 weeks later, on June 11th of the year 1970, he did exactly that. At the Sweet nightclub in Queens, Tommy confronted Benvena again, pistol whipped him into unconsciousness, and then along with Burke and Hill, transported the body upstate in the trunk of a car. Hill would later describe what happened when they realized Benvena was still alive in the back as something Goodfellas significantly compressed. 30 or 40 stab wounds with a kitchen knife, then gunshots. The film gives you a quick cut and a scene change. The reality was extended and deliberate. But there is a layer the film omits entirely, and without which the murder makes only partial sense. The real motive was not simply the shoeshine insult. While Benvena had been in prison, Burke had absorbed his loan shark operation and had no intention of surrendering it back. Benvena had gone to Crazy Joe Gallo to force the issue and reclaim what was his. The shoeshine comment was the pretext that Tommy reached for. The loan book was the reason underneath it. Goodfellas gives you the emotion at the surface. It does not give you the economics beneath it. 4 years later, Tommy killed again in a way that made everything worse. In December of the year 1974, he shot Ronald "Foxy" Girothi 3 times in the face at point-blank range with a .38 caliber pistol as Girothi answered the door of his Ozone Park apartment. Girothi was a member of John Gotti's Bergen Hunt and Fish Club crew. His primary operations were hijacking and bank robbery, and he had been inside Gotti's personal orbit since the early 1960s. He served as bodyguard to Gambino underboss Aniello Della Croce. According to mob informant Salvatore Polisi, who knew both men personally, Gotti considered Girothi practically a member of his household, his presence woven into the daily fabric of Gotti's life in a way that went beyond professional obligation. The circumstances of his death were direct. Tommy had been involved with Girothi's sister, had assaulted her when the relationship ended, and when Jaroth found out and made clear he intended to kill Tommy for it, Tommy arrived at the apartment first. Jaroth opened the door and landed a punch squarely between Tommy's eyes. Tommy drew his weapon and fired 3 times, twice to the head. He left without looking back. What this represented for John Gotti was a simple and devastating arithmetic problem. By the end of the year 1974, Tommy DeSimone had killed 2 of his men. One was a maid soldier from the very crew that had built Gotti's criminal education and formed the foundation of everything he had become. The other was a protege he had watched develop from a young man into a trusted operator, someone whose family was woven into Gotti's daily life. Both murders had gone unanswered because Tommy moved under the protection of Paul Vario and the full institutional weight of the Lucchese family. Gotti was powerful. He was not yet powerful enough to initiate a war with another family over something he could not publicly prove. He recorded the debt, he closed the file, he waited. Here is what Goodfellas compresses into a single stylized death scene. 9 years of institutional negotiation, personal fury held in absolute check by the protocols of inter-family diplomacy. A slow accumulation of specific grievances that transformed Tommy DeSimone from a protected and productive asset into a death sentence waiting on the correct authorization. But why did it take that long? Because the same rules that made the murder of a made man a capital offense also governed precisely how that offense could be answered. The Gambino family knew or strongly suspected that Tommy had killed Batts. Gotti had his own private investigation running as early as the year 1970, but suspicion was not authorization. Moving against a Lucchese associate without verified confirmation and without the formal consent of the Lucchese family leadership risked an inter-family conflict that neither organization wanted and that the commission above both of them would not have sanctioned. Tommy was Paul Vario's man. Vario was a respected capo in full standing. Gotti in the year 1970 was a captain powerful within the boundaries of his own crew, but not positioned to make unilateral moves that could destabilize a relationship between 2 of the 5 families. He could burn. He could not yet act. And so for 9 years, Tommy DeSimone continued to operate. He moved stolen goods through Kennedy Airport. He had planned and executed the Air France robbery in the year 1967, walking away with over $400,000. He accumulated more bodies. Michael Gattia, a waiter he had previously shot in the foot by accident, eventually killed when Burke paid for the man's silence, and Tommy interpreted it as a threat. Dominic Remo Cersani, Burke's own closest friend, executed when Burke learned he was feeding information to the NYPD. And in December of the year 1978, Tommy participated in the Lufthansa heist at JFK, $5.8 million in cash and jewelry, the largest airport robbery in American history at the time of its commission. By any professional measure, Tommy DeSimone was one of the most valuable and most dangerous men in the Lucchese orbit. He was also a clock that had been running for 9 years and was approaching zero. The authorization Gotti needed arrived from inside, as these things always did. Paul Vario had been conducting a sustained affair with Karen Hill, Henry's wife, during the period when Henry was serving a prison sentence. When Tommy, apparently constitutionally incapable of restraining himself, even within the narrow circle of people he absolutely could not afford to touch, approached Karen and was refused, he assaulted her. Karen went to Vario. The calculation Vario then performed was not complicated. On one side of it, a man who had just attacked the woman Vario was sleeping with, a man whose recklessness had been compounding for nearly a decade, a liability who possessed detailed knowledge of too many things, including the Lufthansa operation, to be allowed to continue accumulating reasons to become dangerous. On the other side, the Gambino family, which had been waiting 9 years for precisely this kind of opening, with a legitimate grievance that the entire underworld understood and that Vario could no longer, in good conscience, continue to obstruct. Vario went to the Gambinos. He confirmed what they had been unable to prove through their own channels. Tommy DeSimone had killed Billy Batts, and he gave his formal permission for Tommy's murder. In doing so, he handed Gotti the one thing Gotti had been missing for 9 years, the consent of the Lucchese family to proceed. The film shows you none of this machinery. In Goodfellas, Tommy's death is presented as the inevitable destination of a story that could only have ended one way: a man too volatile to survive the world he chose to inhabit, finally consumed by it. Tommy lured to a ceremony, the empty house, the single gunshot, Jimmy's silent collapse in the phone booth. Henry's voiceover states that Tommy was killed as revenge for Billy Batts and a lot of other things. Gotti's name does not appear. Jarothi's name does not appear. Karen Hill's assault is absent. Paul Vario's betrayal is absent. The 9-year clock that began ticking on the night of that welcome home party at Robert's Lounge in the year 1970 is nowhere in the film. Scorsese uses Tommy's death to close Tommy's arc cleanly. The reality is that the death was the resolution of someone else's arc entirely, and that someone else had been building toward it with deliberate, methodical precision since the Nixon administration. What Goodfellas presents as an anonymous institutional execution was, according to Henry Hill's most detailed accounts, including material documented in his year 2015 book, co-written with journalist Daniel Simone, a deeply personal act carried out by a specific man who had been waiting for it longer than most criminal careers last. Hill's account, corroborated by Salvatore Polisi's testimony given while both men were in the Federal Witness Protection Program, is precise and consistent across multiple tellings. John Gotti was present at Tommy DeSimone's death. Tommy Agro, a Gambino soldier who had also been involved in the killing of Tommy's brother Anthony after Anthony turned informant, was there as well. And Gotti, according to Hill's account, made a deliberate choice about how long it took. Polisi goes further. In the weeks before the killing, Gotti had personally approached him and offered him a role in the hit, framing it as an opportunity to avenge Foxy Jarothi's death and earn his formal induction in the process. Polisi declined. He would later write about what he was told had taken place inside that room. Gotti was there, Agro was there, and it was not quick. The trap itself was constructed with a particular cruelty of something designed by a man who understood exactly what it would mean to its target. Tommy had been told for years that formal induction was coming, that he was finally going to receive the ceremony that would make him a full member of the family. The promise had been extended and then delayed repeatedly on the grounds that Tommy was not fully Italian on both sides, which technically rendered him ineligible under the rules of the commission. But exceptions existed. Men of sufficient value had received their buttons regardless. When word finally came that the ceremony was scheduled, Tommy prepared for it the way a man prepares for the most important day of his professional life. He put on his finest suit, he called his mother, he got into a car with Bruno Facciolo and Peter Vario, men from his own world, men who had shared meals with him and worked alongside him for years, men he had no conceivable reason to distrust. When they arrived at the house in Howard Beach, and he walked inside and found it empty, no gathering, no other men, no candles, no ceremony, just silence, and a room with nothing in it, he understood in the same instant that there was no way back through the door. He had just walked through. His last words were two. Oh no, a single shot to the back of the head. The body was never recovered. One account from former Gambino associate Greg Scarpa places the remains inside a compacted automobile transported to a scrap metal facility in Philadelphia, a car crushed and shipped to U.S. Steel the morning after the killing by a Gambino associate named Richard Bildstern. Scarpa recalls being told that Bildstern said bye-bye, Tommy, as the car entered the press. Other accounts position the body in a suspected burial ground on the Brooklyn-Queens border near Kennedy Airport, a location investigators have referred to as the Hole, where the remains of 3 other gangsters were eventually recovered in the year 2004. Tommy DeSimone's wife, Angela, reported him missing on January 14th of the year 1979. She told police she had not seen him in several weeks. The last time he had borrowed $60 from her. He was declared legally dead by the FBI in the year 1990. His remains have never been located. Goodfellas gives Tommy's mother a closed casket. Henry's voiceover tells you he was shot in the face, so she couldn't have an open funeral. It is one of the most devastating lines in the film. It is also fiction. There was no casket, there was no funeral. There was a wife who did not know what had happened to her husband and a $60 debt that was never going to be repaid. The film gives Tommy's mother a grief she could hold in her hands. History gave her nothing to hold on to at all. Goodfellas is not a film about John Gotti. It is a film about Henry Hill, narrated by Henry Hill, filtered through Henry Hill's perspective, shaped by Henry Hill's nostalgia and his justifications and the particular blind spots of a man telling his own story. Gotti barely registers in that version of events because Hill's life was lived inside the Lucchese world with Vario, with Burke, with Tommy not inside the Gambino hierarchy that ultimately destroyed it from outside. To include Gotti fully would have required the film to expand into 9 years of interfamily politics that would have fractured its momentum and demanded a second film to contain. But there is something more fundamental operating underneath the structural argument. Goodfellas needs Tommy's death to feel like fate. The entire architecture of the film depends on it. The idea that this world has its own gravity, its own laws that operate independently of individual human feeling, and that those laws are absolute and impersonal and indifferent to whoever they fall on. Tommy didn't die because of what John Gotti wanted. He died because he broke the rules. That is the version Scorsese gives you. It is cleaner. It is more cinematic. It converts a specific act of prolonged personal revenge into an institutional verdict and makes the mob feel like a self-correcting system rather than a collection of human beings acting on particular grievances they have been nursing for years. The reality is messier and more human and, in certain ways, more genuinely disturbing than anything the film chooses to show you. Tommy DeSimone did not die because an abstract code demanded his removal. He died because he killed John Gotti's men twice, across 9 years, and a man with a very long memory and a very particular talent for patience finally obtained the one document he had been missing. Gotti waited, he planned, he recruited the people he needed around him. He made sure when the moment finally came that it was conducted on his terms and at the pace he had decided it deserved. That is not institutional inevitability expressing itself through an impersonal mechanism. That is something more specific, more intimate, and considerably more frightening than any